Hi, I'm Brenda Jacobs, the logistics manager. I do the behind the scenes planning so that everything can run smoothly from online content to real life camps and events. Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Python 2D Game Development course. We're in week 3, lesson 8 of our Python Basics module. I'm Randy Jacob from Camp 180 and I'm glad you're here. In the last lesson, we introduced if statements, the building blocks of decision making in code. We saw how Python can check conditions and run code only when something is true. Today, we're taking that a step further by learning how to handle multiple outcomes using else and else. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to make your program smarter and more flexible, which is a huge part of building code. Why do you need else and else? In real life, decisions doesn't always have just one possibility. If you win a race, you celebrate. But if you lose, maybe you practice harder for next time. And sometimes you tie. Games are the same way. If the player's health drops to zero, it's game over. If their score is 100, maybe they unlock a bonus level. Otherwise, they just keep playing. That is where else and else comes in. They let us handle different branches of logic depending on what's happening. Let's start with else. It's the simplest addition to an if statement. Create a new file and call it else underscore ls.py. First, create a variable called score and give it the value 10. Start a conditional statement using the word if. The condition to check is whether score is greater than 50. If this condition is true, display the message you win a prize. After the if statement, use the word else. The else part runs only if the condition in the if statement is false. In this case, display the message try again. Here is what happens. If the condition is true, the program runs the first block and shows you win a prize. If the condition is false, the program does not stop. It runs the else block and shows try again. With if and else together, you will always get one outcome of either the if block runs or the else block runs. Sometimes there are multiple possible conditions to check. That is when we use if, which means else if. Let's extend the previous example. Create a variable called score and give it a value 10. Start a conditional statement using the word if. The first condition checks whether the score is greater than 15. If the condition is true, display the message you win a big prize. Next, use the word if to check other conditions. This condition checks whether score is greater than 5. If this condition is true, display the message you win a small prize. Finally, use the word else for all other cases. If none of the previous conditions are true, display the message try again. Here is what happens in order. First, the program checks if the score is greater than 15. If it is, the player wins a big prize. If this is not true, the program checks if the score is greater than 5. If it is, the player wins a small prize. If neither condition is true, the program runs this else block and the player gets no prize. The important thing to remember is that only one block runs. As soon as a condition is true, Python skips all the remaining blocks. Try the example using health. Create a variable called health and give it the value 50. Start a conditional statement using the word if. The first condition checks whether health is less than or equal to 0. If this condition is true, display the message game over. Next, use the word else to check another condition. This condition checks whether the health is less than 30. If this condition is true, display the message warning low health. Finally, use the word else for all other cases. If neither of the previous conditions is true, display the message "You're doing fine." This example shows how your program can respond in different ways depending on the value of variable. This is exactly how programs in most games decide what happens behind the scenes. Now, let's make the program interactive. Ask the user to type the age and store it as a whole number in a variable called age. Start the conditional statement using the word if. The first condition checks whether age is less than 50. If this condition is true, display the message, "Sorry, you're too young for this game." Next, use the word Elif to check another condition. This condition checks whether the age is less than 18. If this condition is true, display the message, "You can play with parental supervision." Finally, use the word else for all other cases. If neither of these previous conditions is true, display the message, "You can play freely." Notice how the conditions are checked from the smallest to the largest. Python goes through them in order until it finds one that is true. Then it stops checking the rest. Try this mini experiment. Ask the user to type a number and store it as a whole number in a variable called number. Start a conditional statement using the word if. The first condition checks whether the number is greater than 0. If this condition is true, display the word "That's a positive number." Next, use the word "elif" to check another condition. This condition checks whether the number is less than 0. If this condition is true, display the message "That's a negative number." Finally, use the word else for all other cases. If neither of the previous conditions is true, display the message "That's 0." With this setup, your program can handle all possible types of numbers: positive, negative, or zero. Common mistakes. Let's pause and look at some mistakes beginners often make with else and elif. First mistake, forgetting the syntax to elif. If you write a conditional statement without a colon at the end, Python will give an error. Always put a colon after the condition to show where the block of code starts. Second mistake, using more than one else. You can only have one else block at the end of a series of conditions. You can have as many elif blocks as you want, but adding a second else is not allowed. Third mistake, checking conditions in the wrong order. Make sure you check the most specific conditions first and the more general conditions later. For example, if you check whether score is greater than 5 before checking whether it is greater than 15, high scores may be caught by the first condition before the second one is ever checked. Fourth mistake, problems with indentation. The code inside if, elif, and else block must be indented. If it is not indented properly, Python will give an error. Use either the tab key or 4 spaces for each level of indentation. Here is your homework for lesson 8. Create a new file and call it simple underscore calculator dot 1. Ask the user to type two numbers and store it as variables. Ask the user to create an operation. The option should be add, subtract, multiply, or divide. Use if, elif, and else to check which operations the user should choose. Perform the correct calculations based on their choice. Show the results of the calculator to the user. Handle the situation where the user types an operation you did not plan for, such as power. In that case, display the message "invalid choice." This exercise will give you practice combining user input with conditional statements to create a simple calculator program. Don't forget your coding journal and write down what examples you have today, how you use else and elif, any mistakes you ran into and how you fix them. There is also a step-by-step written guide for this lesson available on Gumroad with code samples. You'll also find the full Python Basic Module 1 package there, with all lessons, walkthrough, exercises, cheat sheets, and more. The link is in the description. I really encourage you to go through this tutorial and practice. Writing and running your own code is the fastest way to learn. Today, you learned how to make your code more flexible with else and else. These let your programs respond in multiple ways depending on conditions, just like in real game. In the next lesson, we'll go further with logical operations like and, or, and not. And to also spend some time on indentation, which is critical in writing clean Python code. Thanks for joining me for lesson 8, and I'll see you in lesson 9.